Welcome to episode 26 of the Mobile Classroom, the weekly video podcast where we demonstrate today's most popular technologies. I'm James Messer, and this episode is all about being anonymous when you're on the web. There may be times when you're using a computer and you want to be sure that nobody either knew you were there using the computer, or you want to be sure that if somebody's sitting on the network between you and the website that you're going to, you want to be sure nobody's able to see what you're doing going across the network. There's a lot of different technologies that make up this anonymous type of surfing. We're going to step through three major aspects of anonymous surfing today and give you a feel for what's available from a security perspective so that you can be more protected when you're on the internet. If you're watching this podcast, you'll notice that this entire podcast is absolutely free. You can watch it from the very beginning to the very end and see every bit of content in there. But if you've watched our podcast for a while, you'll know that every third podcast is exclusive just for mobile members. So if you watched our podcast last week, that was a mobile member podcast, and you're only able to get a preview version of that. If you become a mobile member, you'll be able to, of course, see every podcast every week. If you are also a mobile member on our themobileclassroom.com website, then you'll notice you also have another advantage of being able to see every podcast in full HD resolution, 720p resolution. That's 1280 by 720. That's the format that I'm using to record the podcast. So it's crystal clear when you watch it, a beautiful way to watch the podcast in exactly the way it was designed to be watched. If you'd like more information on becoming a mobile member, visit our website. You can find out more information at themobileclassroom.com/members. The podcast this week is about how to be invisible on the network. We're coming up as we record this podcast on Mother's Day, and there is somebody in my house that if I'm searching for a Mother's Day gift, I don't want them to be able to go back later and see where I've been on the internet. I don't want them to see my bookmarks. I don't want them to see my search history or my browsing history. I want to be completely invisible as I'm browsing the internet, and to have this in more of a private mode, be able to make it so that later on I could leave my computer and know that nobody could go back later on and figure out where I've been, what I've been doing. You also might want to take advantage of using a computer that's actually somewhere else to do your browsing. That takes security to a whole nother level. So instead of all of this traffic that I'm doing on the internet looking like it's coming from my computer, I can make all of this traffic look like it's coming from another computer because I'm using that other computer to really do the surfing. That's called using a proxy. I'm going to show you how that's done and some of the gotchas that may be associated with using some of these more open proxies that are out on the internet. And lastly, I want to take you through some more interesting technologies that can encrypt all of this data and send it through the internet. And when it shows up on the other side, finally, at that point, it's something that's in the clear. It's a way that we could send traffic across very long distances and have it so that nobody could tap into that link to see what you're doing. And when it comes out on the other side, nobody actually knows where that traffic came from. It came out of this encrypted cloud of different computers. And all of that process is done with some absolutely free tools that you can download and use. And we're going to do all of that today in this episode. Let's start our discussion of being invisible when you're surfing around with this idea of a private browsing function. And this is what I was referring to earlier, where I didn't want somebody coming into my workstation and looking at what I've been doing inside of my browser. Our browsers today gather a lot of information. Browser history is a good example. You can click a history button on your browser, and it will show you everywhere that you've been over the last day, the last week, the last 2 weeks, and even further back. That can be very helpful if you're trying to remember, what was that website that I visited 3 weeks ago that had that interesting information on it? I need to find that again. It's perfect to go back to your browser history and find that. But what if you don't want to have your particular sessions logged anywhere? And even though you may visit something during that time frame, it's more important to you that nobody knows exactly where you went. Another thing you have to watch out for with browsers is browsers and the websites you go to can leave pieces of information behind on your computer. Those little tiny bits of information are called cookies, and third-party sites will store information on your computer that they've gathered about you. Perhaps they want to know that if you visit again, they want to be able to look at the cookies stored on your machine and find out, when were you here last? Did I put some cookies on your machine earlier? When I put those cookies there, what type of information did I leave? So these third-party sites can keep track of you and know who you are and what you've done. You may not want any cookies cookies stored on your machine, you may want to be just a little bit more private than that. Another thing to watch out for is your search history. When you're searching around the internet using Google, for instance, and you're typing information into your browser and even into Google, those sites and those browsers store that information. So later on, if you wanted to look at what did I search for, you can pull up a list of everything you've searched for over the last number of months or even number of years in some cases. So you may not want to have all of your information stored that way. We may want to configure our browser in a way that completely hides all of this information so that nobody could ever go back and look at any of it. Many browsers these days already have this anonymous type function built into them. Makes it very easy. You click a button and you're in this anonymous mode. If your browser doesn't have that capability, then it's probably coming out in the next version. Google Chrome is a good example of this, where the currently released version of Google Chrome does not have the private browsing function in it. But if you were to download the beta version of Google Chrome, which will probably be in a released mode very soon, it does have that new capability. So it's almost becoming a standard now to have that private browsing function built into it. And if your browser doesn't currently have that feature, it's probably going to have it very soon. This is the latest version of Firefox on the screen. If I look, indeed, this is Firefox 3.5.7, so it's a relatively recent version of Firefox. Under the Tools pull-down menu is this option for Start Private Browsing. Now, before we do that, what I'd like to do is maybe visit some websites myself. Let's pull up Google, and I happen to know this really good one called the Mobile Classroom. We'll pull that up and get those on the screen so you can start to see how it would work when you're normally browsing on the internet, and you can watch all of the things going back and forth. Now, let's say at this point, I'm ready to start shopping for a Mother's Day present, and I want to hide everything that I'm doing. Up to this point, it's been a normal browsing session. But as soon as I go to my Tools pull-down menu and start the private browsing feature, it says, would you like to start private browsing? It will save your current tabs when you're done. When you come back, those tabs will still be there. While you're in that private browsing session, they go away. That sounds good. Let's start our private browsing. Notice those tabs disappear. I'm still in this main Firefox screen. And you'll see at the top, it says Mozilla Firefox Private Browsing. And it even tells you that Firefox won't remember any history for this session. Now let's talk about what will be saved and what won't be saved. First, you don't have to worry about browsing history. You don't have to worry about search history, download history, web form history, cookies, or temporary internet files. So those things will never show up. No matter what you do, you'll never be able to get those back. But keep in mind, there are things in every browser that those browsers do keep track of. For instance, if we were to download files, those files are downloaded and stored on our hard drive. Even though we're in a private browsing mode, once I come out of the private browsing mode, they're still going to be on my hard drive. You can't get rid of those files that way. So you have to keep that in mind. Also, if you bookmark anything while you are in this private browsing mode, your bookmarks will still be there. So if somebody else opened up Mozilla Firefox and they went into the private mode and you had stored a bookmark previously, they would see your private mode bookmarks in there. So those are the things you have to think about when you're in this private mode. If you don't download any files and you don't set any bookmarks, you're just fine. Nobody's ever going to know anything. So in this mode, while I'm in this private browsing mode, and I want to go and look for things like jewelry. I want to find some Mother's Day presents. I want to look for flowers, look for chocolates. I can go to any of these locations and start browsing around. And I know later on when I pop out of this, she's never going to know that I visited any sites looking for anything special for Mother's Day. All she knows is she thinks that she's going to get perhaps a meat slicer or maybe a new washer and dryer, because those are usually the hints that I leave. In reality, it's always nice to show up with something that's a little bit different than that. It's always good to have a surprise. So your private browsing becomes a real interesting use, especially not just in a home, but if you're somewhere else. If you're in a library, you're somewhere where you want to be able to browse. And when you leave, you may never be coming back to that machine, and you might not want to leave any trace of anything you were doing while you were there. Private browsing is a great way to do that. Let's come out of the private browsing mode and let's see what happens. I'm now done with my browsing. Let's stop our private browsing. And now notice it pops back to those screens I was at before. It actually brings open those same tabs I had before, and it opens up the website again to where I was before I left and went into that private browsing mode. So I didn't lose anything. I could have 10 tabs up here. When I flip back, it's going to reload all 10 of those tabs for me, so I don't miss anything. I don't lose anything. I don't have to close anything out. A very seamless process, very easy to use. And now you know that anything that happened during that private browsing session, really just between me and you. The private browsing capability ensures that nobody could step up to my computer and see where I went. But if somebody was on another website and they were watching everyone going to and from that website, they would very, very easily see all of those requests I was making to that website from my IP address. I wasn't hiding where I was simply hiding where people would be able to see after I was finished. If you want to in some way protect where you are originating this traffic from so that the website doesn't really know that it's your IP address sending that information, we can use something called a proxy that allows us to have another device actually make those web requests for us. This is a very simplified view of what a proxy is. What you have is many devices that are out here on the internet side, and those devices will be communicating into a proxy. And as they talk back and forth, this link between those two is going to have this IP address that goes from my machine directly into the proxy. And that's very simple to be able to send all of that traffic in. In fact, there's many devices probably using that proxy simultaneously that are also sending requests into that proxy. So many, many different connections going into that device. The proxy then receives this request that I made, say that I wanted to go to Google. It receives the request, and what it does is essentially terminates that request right here at the proxy. It kind of stops and puts a line right there. It then restarts the request to Google and sends its own request. So as Google sees those packets coming in, it sees the packets coming from the proxy because the proxy is essentially performing that request for me. Google, of course, reports back the results of everything, and the proxy then sends back its own results to me. So it's really stopping the connection right in the middle and creating brand new connections from that location. There's some challenges with this, of course. This proxy being used by many people at one time, that poor machine really can get pummeled. It has to be a machine that's specifically designed to do this with plenty of bandwidth, plenty of CPU cycles, plenty of resources. Essentially, you may have 1,000 people communicating to a proxy, which means that proxy may be making thousands of communications out to Google. So you can see that that particular communication path and everything that it's doing is very much more souped up than any type of single machine performing these features. But that's why we have the proxy there, so that it can act as that middleman and we can have it performing all these functions for us. There are a number of proxies available on the internet that you can purchase so that you can buy time on a proxy machine so that it will always be available to you. Those machines that you purchase time on generally are proxies. They are unlimited. You can use it as much as you want, and usually they are really designed for high performance. There's also a number of open proxies or free proxies on the internet as well. Those come with a few hitches. First, you don't know the proxy, so you have to be very careful about the type of connections you're making to those third-party devices. And usually bandwidths aren't really good to those proxies, and they're usually supported by advertising. So you may see some extra ads on top of that. Let's try some of those capabilities and see what it looks like. Here's this Mozilla Firefox browser screen we had before. I'm not in a private mode right now, so this is the normal browser that we might use already in our normal day-to-day use. And I'm going to go to proxy.org. This is a relatively trustworthy open proxy library here that tells you all of these different proxies that are available. And you can see that there are 4,964 working proxies right now. They're colored different ways depending on the performance to those devices. And they have things that make sense. freesurfproxy.org. You can actually see locations where they may be located. You can see the type of proxy software that it's using there. From our perspective, we don't really care about the software so much, but if you were running a proxy or you wanted to use a certain kind of proxy communication, you could even pick and choose down to the type of software they were using. So let's use one here that right here, surfwithease.com. We're going to click on that, and it brings up and says, Surf with Ease, your 100% free proxy online service. And notice there's ads that start popping up. And what we can do now is, let's go to Google. I'll go to www.google.com, and we will click the Surf button. And the page that comes up, it pops open a new tab. There's Google. But notice there's some interesting things about this screen that are a little bit different than what you may be used to seeing when you go to Google. For instance, big advertising right across the top. So already we're starting to see that this is not the normal Google screen we might have. Because the proxy is in the middle, the proxy can provide you with whatever it wants to. Again, you do have to think about being safe when you're using these proxies and the things you might get on your browser, on your computer. You have to be very careful about the proxies that you visit. Also notice that this Google session is being generated from a proxy server that's in Germany. So everything on the screen is in German. It says Google Deutschland. In fact, down here, fortunately, there's a link for google.com in English. If I click that, I'm still going, notice up here, to surfwithEase.com. But it's taking me, it's proxying that communication to Surf with Ease, going out to Google, getting a response, and then responding back to me. That little man-in-the-middle type functionality means that anywhere I happen to go with this Google connection or with this proxy connection means that that nowhere in here is anybody going to ever know this originated from my machine. It's originating from this machine that is in Germany. Let's test this idea. Let's have our proxied communication go out and find out more information about our IP address. So let's go out to the Surf with Ease website, and I'm going to go to www.whatismyipaddress.com. And we're going to surf to that. That request is going to be made from the proxy server. So what we're going to see when we go to the What is my IP address website, I'm going to close the advertisement that pops up, and it says my IP address is 87.106.252.91, which is definitely not the IP address I have on my computer. And it even tells me that this is a suspected proxy server or a network sharing device. You can see the ISP information. It even tells you that this particular IP address is in Germany. So I know that the requests that were made to that What is my IP address web server really did come from Germany. If I go back to my machine that's not going through that proxy server and I go to the same place, whatismyipaddress.com, when it goes out, it's coming from my computer. So when this pops up and does the request, the lookup from my IP address, it knows that that's Comcast cable. It's in Tallahassee, Florida, which is exactly where I am. So now you can see the difference. When you're using a proxy, looks like you're coming not only from another computer in another country. And therefore, when you finally get to Google or the website that you're visiting, it thinks you're visiting the website from that Germany location, not from where you're sitting in Tallahassee, Florida. Just another way that you can protect yourself and be a little bit more invisible when you're browsing the network. When we were using that proxy communication, I was going to Google, I was going to other websites, and all of the information that I was sending out over the network, even though it originated and really was proxied by a server in Germany, all that information was in the clear. If anybody tapped into that connection, they could see exactly what I was doing and what was going on over those non-encrypted connections. What if you were able, though, to have that combination of a proxy type communication so that nobody can really tell where the traffic was originating from, and combine that with a way to encrypt things, and at the same time do it so that those types of encrypted links and connections changed all the time? Well, you can actually make that happen with a very simple and open source communication project called Tor, the Onion Router. Tor has this type of functionality. And if you look at this screen, Tor works exactly the same way as a proxy, except the communication that Tor uses is all encrypted. You're using something called a virtual private network. Normally, you would be sending encrypted traffic to the VPN concentrator and then sending it on its way in the clear to wherever you were communicating to. In the case of Tor, however, it's much more complicated than that and much more detailed in an encrypted way before it ever gets to Google. Let's look and see exactly how they accomplish this. There are many different programs and many different websites that perform some of these encrypted type functionalities for this anonymous browsing, but Tor is probably one of the most well-known that's out there. You can find this information at www.torproject.org, and Tor stands for the Onion Router. And just like an onion, as you peel things open, you finally get to the piece that's in the middle, the unencrypted data that you're sending back and forth. If you'd like to know more information about exactly how this works, under the Overview tab is a really nice breakdown of exactly what they've set up here. Tor is set up with all of these devices that are out on the internet that are called relays. These relay devices are specifically designed to take requests from people that are using Tor and encrypt the data and send them off inside this big cloud of machines as encrypted data back and forth. Once you connect to Tor and send that data through, these green links show where you've encrypted the data, and only at the end, when you're ready to hop back off and perform that actual browsing, does it actually send traffic that's unencrypted. So it's not encrypted from one end to the other. If you sent that encrypted data all the way the other side, that other device would have no idea what that was. It's all a bunch of gobbledygook. So you do have to finally take that information and put it into the clear. But of course, because it's coming off of this last node, this Bob device down here really has no idea where the data originated. It just has a different IP address every time, because one of the things you can do is click a button and scramble things up again and take a completely different path through this matrix of different machines that's set up in this encrypted cloud, so that when you're going out to Bob or Jane, it now might be going to a different place to be able to get there. Just another way that you can hide behind all of these things and make it extremely difficult for somebody to trace back that communication all the way back to your workstation. Tor is very simple to install. In fact, one of the easiest installations you can do are a standalone install. You can even put it on a USB key. From the download links, you can see there is a Tor Browser bundle for Windows. That's the one that we're going to use here. There's also a bundle for Apple OS X. There's an installation bundle for Windows that you can integrate it with your existing Windows install. And there's also pieces that you can download for Linux and Unix type environments as well. I've already downloaded and unzipped and uncompressed all of these files that are in this Tor Browser bundle. There's no installation to do, nothing special to install. You simply get the files and put them on a machine on your hard drive on a USB key, and you run it directly from there. Here's the Tor Browser folder that I created once I downloaded that install bundle, that offline bundle, and I just unzipped it. I uncompressed it into this folder, and here are the folders and the information that's available. You can see there's one program right here that says Start Tor Browser. What could be easier than that? Let's double click that. It's going to pop up a little Tor window here that gives us a status of the communication that it's doing out to the Tor network. You can see the first thing it does is connect to Tor. It's doing this from something called a Vidalia control panel. For those of you familiar with Vidalia, Georgia, you know that that's some of the sweetest onions that you can get are Vidalia onions, and they come from that city that's in Georgia. And so the control panel for that is called the Vidalia control panel, and it automatically starts up its standalone version of Firefox and tells you exactly what's going on. In fact, it tells you, sorry, you're not using Tor. And that's because last time I was in here, I disabled Tor. But if I want to enable Tor, I can click and toggle the status. It says Tor enabled, and let's refresh this screen. And it's going to tell you, well, let's have it restart and go back to my home page. Here we go. Instead of refreshing, it doesn't let me refresh. It does one single click and then goes out and starts pulling this in again. Now, one thing you're going to notice when you start using Tor, using proxies and other third-party devices like this, where you're hopping through multiple links through machines that you possibly have no control over, the performance is going to be different than the performance that you might usually get through your internet connection. There might be a delay. You'll notice when I clicked and said, show me that home page when I wasn't using Tor, it popped right up. But when I turned Tor on and I went back to that home page, took a little bit longer to get there. And that's one of the trade-offs that you have when you're using this type of technology, is you're probably not going to get the same performance you have when you're using a completely open and unencrypted link through that connection. But considering the trade-offs, going a little bit slower, a little bit faster in that type of scenario, probably not the biggest concern. Let's go back to this control panel. Let me show you this Vidalia control panel. You can stop Tor right from here. You can view the network you're using. If you wanted to be one of the relays and part of that big matrix of machines, you could even be one of the relays that's being used by other people. I can also view a bandwidth graph of what's been going on so far. So if you're trying to figure out if the relay that you're on right now is performing well or not performing well, you can see exactly the performance that you're going to get from these things. For instance, let's go out here. I'm going to open up a new tab and just go to Google. And when I do that, you'll be able to watch the performance as this goes sent and received through the network and the type of performance that you're going to get on the other side. Now, if you're not happy with that performance, you may want to choose to go to a different set of relays. And if you pop up the message that says, view the network, it will show you all of these different connections out there in the world, the different countries those happen to be in, and they are sorted by the amount of bandwidth available. So if you want to hop through Switzerland to be your first hop into that encrypted cloud, or you'd prefer going through a local US connection before you're ever going to the encrypted cloud, you can simply click a button. It will change exactly where you're going to get from point A to point B. And when you go to a different website like themobileclassroom.com, now it's going to use the new connections that I've set up. So just a couple of clicks, and now I'm using a completely different method to get from point A to point B. It's all encrypted and all using the Onion router to make that happen. Now, you already saw that when I wanted to enable or disable that capability, right here in the browser is an add-on that you can right mouse click and it will enable and disable that Tor functionality. But as we can see here right now, I chose that new connection and my performance really was not as good as before. It's like I finally got a little bit of throughput there and then went back down again. So a little bit spottier connection through this particular relay that I've chosen. So you may find that you're having to do different things back and forth to get the best possible performance through using the Onion router. Sometimes it's a little bit hit and miss, but if you need the anonymous features, you need that encrypted capability through the network, and you want to be able to do it for free, you really can't beat the capabilities and functionality found in the Onion router. Well, now you've seen a number of the different technologies available out there, available completely free to make your browsing experience a little bit more private, anonymous, and in some cases encrypted from point to point through the internet. If you'd like to see any of our other videos on our website, you can visit our website at themobileclassroom.com. And if you'd like to see whenever we come out with a new video every week, you can get notified immediately from our Twitter account at twitter.com/mobileclassroom. On our website, you can also join our Facebook page, where I also put notices out there as well. And if you'd like to leave me a message, simply send me an email at james@themobileclassroom.com. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you next time on The Mobile Classroom.